Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Duke. Welcome to another episode of I'm Right. I'm really grateful to have with me today an old friend, Hal Shurtleff, a great patriot. Hal, welcome to the program.
Well, Duke, thanks for having me back on.
My pleasure. And look, we're going to talk about Ryan Clayton today. And if that's a name you haven't heard, you really do need to know it. Ryan Clayton recently came to infamy by attending the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and screaming horrible things about Trump being a traitor, actually threw some Russian paper flags at the president. This made national news.
This president conspired with agents of the Russian government to steal an election. We should be talking about treason in Congress, not about tax cuts. Ryan Clayton from American State Action.
Hal, tell us a little bit about the incident, and then tell us what we should know about Ryan Clayton.
Well, it's interesting. I heard the story that somebody was arrested at the nation's capital, and the minute I heard the story that he was throwing Russian flags, I said, it must be Ryan Clayton. Now, Ryan is he now leads a group called America Take Action or something like that, something that started up very recently. And back at this past winter, he was at CPAC handing out Russian flags to the attendees. And when I heard about that, I says, well, this guy's an interesting fellow. Ryan Clayton used to work for Cenk Uygur. We all know beloved Cenk of the Young Turks, that progressive free-thinking YouTube channel named after the Turks who, in honor of the Turks who committed genocide against the Armenians. And we know that Cenk had been a Holocaust denier. I guess when you deny the Armenian Holocaust, that's a politically correct Holocaust, so you can get away with it, still have credibility. But Ryan Clayton was the executive director for Wolfpack, which was an organization set up by Cenk Uygur for the purpose of an Article 5 convention.
Right, and this is the real interesting fact. He's a rabble-rouser. He's a liberal progressive operative. He's a troublemaker. He's what you and I would call a professional troll, right? He goes to CPAC. He doesn't have an original thought in his head. He just likes to troll other people with his thoughts. But the important thing here is the Article 5 convention. Talk about his role in the Article 5 convention, and tell our listeners again, real quickly, what the Article 5 convention is and why we should be wary of it.
Well, Article 5 under the U.S. Constitution calls for two ways to amend the Constitution. The first one is the only one we've ever used. That's where 2/3 of the U.S. House and Senate propose an amendment. Then it goes to the states for approval, for ratification. You need 3/4 of the states. The other way is through a convention where 2/3 of the states apply for a call, and then once the 2/3 are in, Congress will call for a convention. And there are lots of problems with this one because, first off, the climate we're in today, we're probably as so much conflict. It would be the worst time to do it. Not only that, but there's absolutely no way you could control an Article 5 convention. See, the term runaway has been used, and people who support would say, oh, that can't be done. But when you read Article 5, all it says that the purpose of this convention is to propose amendments. It doesn't say specific amendments, like, for example, a balanced budget amendment or an amendment or a group of type of amendments. Like Convention of States has their resolution to read something to the effect that they want to have amendments that will limit the federal government, that sort of thing. But it can't be done. And even a balanced budget amendment, it sounds really nice when you first hear about it, but there's no guarantee that such an amendment like this would actually balance the budget because there's escape clauses in all the proposed amendments I've seen. In time of war and national emergency. So they go ahead and pass this amendment. They've just made the concept of national emergency constitutional. Right now, it's not in the Constitution. And there's nothing there about increasing the taxes. I mean, if we have a Federal Reserve that simply prints money, say, oh, okay, well, we have to balance the budget. We'll just print out more money. So these quick fixes aren't the way to go. Well, interesting, this latest drive for an Article 5 convention, I think, is the most powerful and most well-funded. But back in 2011, there was an event at Harvard University, September. It was hosted by Larry Lessig, who is a far-left professor, former Obama advisor, and there's a video out there where he's at a function and he's mocking Christianity. So that's the caliber. And the other man is a man named Mark Meckler. Mark Meckler at that time was the head of the National Tea Party Patriots, somebody that's arrived on the scene in a very short time. And I happened to attend that event. I was there with media credentials the second day. We weren't allowed to videotape or interview anybody inside the school, the law school. But outside, I actually caught Cenk Uygur and Larry Lessig. They were interviewing. And I didn't know who Cenk was. I didn't know the name, but I knew who Lessig was. And I videotaped their conversation where Cenk is saying, boy, that first convention we had in 1787, that was a runaway. And wouldn't it be great to have another one? And Lessig is laughing and said, yes, let's have more runaway conventions. So when the first time I met Ryan Clayton, he was testifying on behalf of an Article 5 resolution in the state of New Hampshire. He's very well groomed and had a nice suit, very professional looking. And he got up there, and I testified before he did. And so I wasn't able to counter, unfortunately. But we won the day. They ended up rescinding or killing all the applications at this point. He said that it's a conspiracy theory, the idea of a runaway convention. Well, his founder is actually, not only does he want one, he's laughing about it. He's hoping for one. And I believe it's actually on the Wolfpack. If you go to the Wolfpack website, you can actually find the video. But I have it on the Camp Constitution YouTube channel. It's only like 2.5, 3 minutes. So Ryan was interesting too. Ryan doesn't like to make he doesn't like the name George Soros when you make the connection to George Soros. And I testified, and they were talking about what they're advocating. Wolfpack is something they're calling the 28th Amendment. They want to repeal a Supreme Court decision that dealt with the Political Action Committee, and they start their own, Citizens United. So they say keep the money out of politics, and corporations aren't people, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I mentioned that they were so concerned about big money in politics. And when I testified, I said, well, we get big money on this issue. I said, you've got groups like ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, which is very well funded. And you got Wolfpack, and they seem to have a lot of money too. I said, we should get big money out of the Article 5. And I made reference to George Soros. And they took exception to that. And I guess it was 2 years ago in Massachusetts, in Boston, I was testifying there. And he came up and he threatened to sue me. He thought I was an attorney. I said, boy, how you offend me like that, calling me an attorney. But I said, hey, go ahead, do your worst. You're going to sue me, go ahead, sue me. But the connection to Soros is through the media consortium, the Young Turks. Some people, and I know a friend of mine, Robert Brown, out in the western part of the country, he's bumped into well.
So, it's really interesting to me, Hal, is what you said is exactly right. I want the people listening there's a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans who think they want a constitutional convention. They think that this is wonderful. We can get term limits. We can get budgets passed. But ask yourself this. There are already laws on the books. We have the Constitution. We have all the founding laws, the founding documents. Which of those are you willing to lose? Are you willing to lose the Second Amendment to get budget considerations? Are you willing to lose the First Amendment? Think about how on college campuses, progressives are actually attacking the very notion of free speech. You open the Constitution up this way, and as you said, you cannot limit a constitutional convention. You cannot decide that these are the three issues we're going to talk about and nothing else. And so all these really radical, sinister, dark lefties out there who are giggling in private about the possibility of a constitutional convention will give you your stupid term limits. You give us the Second Amendment. We'll give you, this weird little budget proposal that Congress is free to ignore anyhow. You let us put restrictions on the First Amendment too. This is something that has to be said. Ryan Clayton is an agitator. He works for agitators that go all the way up to George Soros. His nonsense at throwing flags at the president or at CPAC, screaming about treason and collusion. Have you seen, Ryan, since it's been discovered that the Russians had much more to do with Clinton and uranium than they ever had to do with Trump? Have you seen him since?
Oh, it's fascinating, too, is when the left cries treason, you know something's wrong. Treason is a crime against a nation. And so they're actually advocating a sense of nationalism when you say you're committing treason. And, there's so much documentation about the United States, elements of the United States that have aided and abetted the Soviet Union since the Bolshevik Revolution. And this information doesn't get out to the extent it does. Anthony Sutton, the late Anthony Sutton, has written numerous books on the subject. Wall Street and I think it was called Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. Then he wrote a book in the early 80s or mid 80s. It was called The Best Enemy Money Can Buy. So it's all well documented. And so the idea that somehow Donald Trump is colluding with Putin to up through the election is just ridiculous.
And meanwhile, as we said, they're not terribly interested about Russian uranium, right? Russians cornering the market on uranium and paying Bill Clinton handsome money for that. It's funny that what we heard for months about Trump and Russian collusion, now that it seems like the Democrats are more implicated than the Republicans, boom, absolute radio silence.
And it becomes a non-issue, dude. That's absolutely right. Well, let's get back to a little bit about the Article 5 convention. Right now, there's 27 states that have extant applications. We have to, and all they need is another 7. And there's lots of applications that are sitting in state houses. In fact, Massachusetts will be hearing one in a couple of days. I don't think it has a chance of passing, but you can never take anything for granted. And I say that our side, the Article 5 opponents, I say we're being outspent about 1,000 to 1. New Hampshire was a case in point. They had Larry Lessig's group. They had a group. He started another one called Mayday PAC. So here's a guy that wants to end PACs, but he's starting PACs all the time. And these super PACs that donate money to people in the state, they haven't won any of the elections of the people that they're spending this money to. And then you have the Convention of States, which is a so-called conservative group that's pushing one. And I want to point out that I know some really decent patriotic Americans that have backed this Convention of States. Some of them have reconsidered. I know that one of the sponsors in Maine of an Article 5 resolution 4 years ago, he's completely done a 180 and realizes the dangers of that. But there's a lot of nastiness going on. A couple of years ago, I was among a few that were accused of bribing a New Hampshire state senator, the Convention of States sent out an email. And it was kind of funny because I got a hold of the state senator was furious, but I got a hold of another guy, a senator. He says, "Oh, how much did he charge?" You know, he was kidding. But that's the kind of depth they'll go to try to discredit the opponents of an Article 5 convention. And by the way, the New American Magazine just carried an article about the Nation. I think it was the Nation magazine that is advocating an Article 5 convention.
Yep, radical lefty. When people like George Soros and The Nation magazine, which is nothing more than a pseudo-Bolshevik rag, when they come out for Article 5 conventions, it ought to make every conservative, every Republican in this country very, very wary about opening up the Pandora's box of the Constitution. Say the last word, if you don't mind, Hal, about Ryan Clayton and what we can do to fight the Ryan Claytons of the world.
Well, I think exposure is what really needs to be done. I don't think we need to be going around throwing flags at people and screaming and yelling. I think just exposing people like him. He was actually harassing a lady that was involved with Veritas, the group that's exposing some of the leftists. And he was at one of their parties, I think it was in New York City, where he was forcibly removed from that gathering. So I think once people see who he is, they know that he's there to cause trouble. But that's not the way we're going to. The way we're going to win this is through educating and informing people to get them to have an appreciation of our nation's organic documents, to obviously listen to you and the Freedom Project education and get involved in groups like Camp Constitution.
As we know, Constitution is the solution. Hal, thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll have you back on soon.
All right. Thank you so much. God bless.
If you enjoyed this video and all of our videos, please consider a tax-deductible donation so we can keep the whole thing free for you. I'm Dr. Duke. Thanks for watching.